Sherry, you're muted.
Wow, and I just did such a great job introducing everything. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to try it again. Let's see if I get even better. Hello, welcome to the Center of Excellence for Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultations Conference, Equity from the Start. My name is Sherry Heller, and I'll be serving as your session facilitator. And I am joined by Mercedes, who will be serving as our technology host. This session is being recorded, and closed caption or transcription is available through the Zoom platform. We're asking that you hold your questions till the end. The speakers are going to create some time to have questions at the end, but if you have any technology problems or whatnot, feel free to use the chat. We want to let you know before we begin that the views, policies, and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of SAMHSA or HHS. And that said, I'm going to pass it over to Rob and Angela, who will be conducting this workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this kind of closing hour for our conference. If you've been a part of any other session, you know that it's been really awesome so far. So we're grateful for you to be here with us. Brief introductions. My name is Robert Harris, a licensed professional counselor in the District of Columbia, but also in the Maryland area. So excited to be here. Formerly a consultant, now working in technical assistance. And my co-presenter is?
Good afternoon. I'm Angela Williams. I am a school director at Educare of Washington, D.C. in Ward 7. And together we plan on taking you through, my hope is that through my perspective as a school director, that we have a different lens on what we'll present with you today. So welcome and thank you for being here.
So yeah, as Sherry said, please hold your questions to the end. We will do our best to keep a reasonable pace so that we have the space to ask questions at the end. And so with that being said, let's go ahead. So our agenda is this, right? We're going to start off with grounding the work in key concepts. You know that our presentation is themed equity from the start, making sure that we understand the connections that this presentation has to that overall theme. We're going to tell a little bit of a story. We're going to also then realize that similar is not always the same, learning the question. We'll go into Bronfrenbrenner's ecological model, a framework of understanding, and then we'll basically look to apply that and talk about why it matters. And at the end, as we said, we'll have reflections and questions. So let's continue. Equity from the start. Miss Angela and I, we work in the District of Columbia. We work in an area and in schools. I personally have worked in schools that are predominantly of children of color. The school Educare serves predominantly children of color. And so when we think about health equity, we're talking about families and children receiving uniquely understood they are uniquely understood and cared for, right? Using comprehensive and multi-generational approach to promote opportunity to achieve healthy and fulfilling lives. We want to make sure that everybody has access to being able to fulfill a life that's healthy, right? Like as much as possible is reasonable. We're also going to cover implicit bias, the idea that all of us have things that we naturally, unconsciously at time, lean on that influence the things that we do. And finally, we all know that we're focused on infant and early childhood mental health. We want to make sure that our babies, our youngest and most vulnerable population, have the opportunities to grow up as well as they can be, right? Making sure that they have sound practices to help navigate the challenges of this world. And so this presentation is framed through these lenses, and this should be an understanding for us all.
All right, so we will get started with a short activity. I want everyone who's in this room, take a look at this picture. Take a look at who's in it. Take a look at body language, the environment. Just take some time to look at this image. And I want you to think to yourself, what story describes this image? If you had to create a short story about this person, this child who's sitting here, what would that story be? We're just going to take some time on your own to come up with that story about this image. And then we're going to share those stories. So we'll just give you a minute or two to describe this image with a story. All right. By this time, maybe you've come up with your story. Now, what we would like to do is we'd like for us to go into breakout rooms and just share your story. Meet the other participants in the group and share your story. You will have about 6 minutes to share your story, and then we will come back as a large group, and there'll be some prompting questions for you.
Sure, okay.
You doing it?
Okay.
All right. Oh. Everyone is coming out of their breakout rooms. Thank you for taking that time to share, create those stories and share it with one another. Can we have maybe 2 or 3 people to share in this large forum what their story was? You can just pop yourself off the mute and go for it.
Oh, let me put my camera on.
Thank you.
We talked about in my group, my story was that she's disengaged for some reason, feeling left out, unheard. She's not engaged in whatever is going on. One of the things is because she's sitting sideways and she's slouched. And I just know as a culture, and I talked about it in our group, as a cultural thing, that tells me, that speaks volumes to me, especially because she's sitting sideways and she's slouching over. And her posture is telling me that she's either disappointed, discouraged, or not being heard, and nobody's paying attention.
I really appreciate you sharing that story, Miss Linda. With the group you were in, were there any similarities or differences to your story with the story that others shared?
There were differences. One of the participants felt that she was looking at some books. And if you hear me, if I'm telling the story wrong, please correct me. That she might be looking at some books and, trying to choose a book, or maybe not engaged in whatever, the book. Another person was similar to my story, just different language, but, saw that she was disengaged. And another woman said something about similarity, but not as, I guess, as strong as I was making it feel. Like, yeah, we see something, but it's, nothing that's really stuck out as urgent or needed to be taken care of. And if I'm wrong, please share. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to
it. Thank you so much for sharing that story and your story and the similarities and differences with others in your group. Can we have one more? Can one more person share their story about this image?
I can share.
Thank you.
Sandy from Southern California. She's definitely discouraged. It looks like she's the only one in that classroom. I don't see other kids in there. Obviously, it's a school. And my story is that this school has failed her. Not the school, the system. We, the collective, we have failed her. She might be in there, come in and get extra help. But this just doesn't happen to kids that the system is supporting.
Thank you for sharing. And were there any other similarities or any differences with the group that you were in for your breakout room?
We really didn't. I think I was the only one that shared. I got some nods, but yeah. So I'm not sure what others were thinking.
Okay.
I think maybe, I don't know, Sandy might have missed, because I was in her group and.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think you just have missed us. But myself and another person, I think Jesse, if I'm saying your name correctly. We were just noticing just her body language. Like we just kind of described that she was hunched over. Jesse was mentioning like she looks like she kind of has like a slight smile on her face. Um, and we noticed like because she's sideways, we couldn't see, if she's looking at anything specific. Um, Maybe she was like looking out the window, but it definitely seemed that she was either just kind of alone in the picture just because nobody else is in the picture with her, but not necessarily like having a kind of negative state of loneliness or that emotionality.
Mm.
And I'm trying to remember if there was anything else that I'm missing, Jesse, but yeah, it was mostly just like her um, body language. And it seemed like she was alone and kind of maybe contemplating something.
Yeah, we didn't necessarily think it was negative. Like she could be, daydreaming or just feeling relaxed or a little bored. Maybe she's waiting for the other kids to get to class. I don't know.
Mm.
Yeah.
Those are really good. First of all, you can really tell who your audience is. But thank you everyone for sharing your story based upon this image. There were some things in the chat that were really that really hit what we're trying to get out of this activity. And so what we have learned is that there were some similarities to our stories and some differences, but we want to come across that same isn't similar. So based upon a model that we'll show you next, it'll help us challenge our biases. So in the chat, I saw a couple people say, they based their stories of what was going on with her based upon what was going on with ourselves. And with that, all of our stories are true. And so what this activity highlights is that life is more about similarities and not sameness. So although there are many isms in life, we have ageism, racism, all these isms, they often lead us to look for like a quick solution or things that reinforce our internal bias. So we looked at what we might have thought has happened to her because it has happened to us, or we've seen it happen, and then we created this story. And so what Mr. Harris and I would like to do is we would like for you to hold on to the idea about internal bias and what we can do as practitioners to help us see the children that we might serve as a whole child. So just very quickly, I know some of us may be familiar with this model, but this is Bronfrenbrenner's ecological system. And this theory, he wanted to use this diagram to show us ways that the environmental system is interconnected. And so from where you see the children and that first ring where it says microsystem, that is the system that is in that child's most immediate surroundings. So this might include family, parents, siblings, teachers, friends, neighbors. And within that system, because it is the most intimate with that child, we'll see how the interactions between all the systems help to form a child's development, but also behaviors and growth. So after the microsystem, if you look on the outside, it is the mesosystem. The mesosystem can be influenced by the interactions in the microsystem. So for example, in the microsystem, if let's say the parents and the teachers are in a disagreement about grades, that can have a negative impact on the child's microsystem. But let's say if teacher and parent have positive interactions about, let's say, potty training, then that can change the child's trajectory to be positive as well. If you look at the exosystem, this is moving more broad. So that covers like local government and maybe the friends of a parent, mass media, extended family, and how these local government can affect a child's growth and behavior, even though it's on a broader scale. So, for example, let's say if we're thinking about local government and they changed a certain policy in school that maybe took away free lunch, and that child needed free lunch, it will affect that child's growth and development. On the macro system, this goes into social norms, economic systems, political systems, culture is really big. And so the culture of a family or the culture of a community can also influence a child's or individual's growth and behavior. And on the outer portion of the system, this is a chrono system, and this is basically time. So it goes into maybe if an individual was born during the recession, being born in that period of time could have an influence on that individual's growth and pandemic growth and behavior. So just very quickly, we wanted to give you an idea about this theory, because we want to reframe how we use our internal biases to create a story on children when we are interacting with them and when we are trying to have a bi-directional relationship with them.
Yeah, thinking about what Ms. Williams said, and you heard Ms. Williams is the director of a center, and I worked as a consultant. And I think one of the things that we had come to understand and challenged each other when coaching or dealing with children in classrooms and challenging behavior situation is like, are we seeing it all? And one of the things about Bronfrenbrenner's ecological model is there is a way, and there are questions, there are considerations that extend far beyond the child that if we were to keep in mind, may change our entire approach. Some things are happening like the pandemic that are influencing children that really the child had no control over. They did not control when they were born. And yet it doesn't change the fact that they were still born during this pandemic. When something's happened in the classroom, are we keeping that in our mind? Or are we just seeing another child who isn't sharing? Or seeing, for example, are we seeing another teacher who is just frustrated because they don't want a child is having difficulty sleeping at night? Or are we seeing another parent who is just arriving late yet again with a screaming child, dropping them off? Or are we opening ourselves up to see the whole individual, to look at the story? And so what it really reinforced, Ms. Williams and I, through experience, is that even if I'm looking at the same child, or I'm seeing the same thing 2 days in a row, there can be two very different things influencing that child. So you see these two pictures. What I would start to now ask myself is, what's happening here? Or what don't I know? What don't I know that could be influencing this moment? You see a family come in on 2 different days, excited and happy. There could be two very different reasons for that happened around them. There can be so much more that we can consider, but sometimes those isms just lead us, and isms can be influenced just by time. If you're a consultant and you're in a space where you are really one of few, and you have multiple families and centers, I don't know if this may be your story. I can imagine that sometimes time alone can lead you to want to find the quickest thing to a solution. And sometimes you may not have the time to explore all the things impacting a child. If you think the same thing for even consultants who may not have a large caseload, but maybe the cases themselves are a lot. I know Ms. Williams and I really try to challenge ourselves to slow down, right? Slow down and continue to ask the question, what don't we know? What else could be happening here? So I want us to look at these pictures. How are these pictures related? Is the question we might ask, right? If what we see before us as a consultant or as a director, as a teacher, as a coach is the child, are we considering all the things that may have occurred and happened outside of the moment that we're coming across that could have influenced the child? Are we encouraging those who are interacting with this child to consider all those things? So a story that we could tell, a story that we could be curious about is maybe during homework time, it was incredibly difficult and it just was so frustrating that adult was upset, child got frustrated and they're carrying that into the day. Or maybe in that second picture, that's an email of something wrong at work that then carried over into the mood that was established or felt in the house that then influenced the child that then came into school. Or maybe it was about the traffic that led them home late to then not get an email, or maybe there was something that happened in the community. There was community violence the night before that influenced this child. All of these things could be true. Are we considering all of them?
Mhm.
Are we keeping that in mind? And are we keeping that in mind when we're encouraging other people to consider the framework of a child or how a child is showing up before us? Right? Because really the equity exists in understanding that each child, each moment, each situation is really different.
Mhm.
And sometimes we can practice inequity by just saying, well, I've seen this before.
Mhm.
I've been here before. I've done this. Right? This is the same thing like yesterday, and really isn't, because at best is similar, because yesterday happened. Today is brand new.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious for this, like, same thing, right? You come with a family, and sometimes we're so, I think somebody put it in the chat, even our perspective based on problem solving or strength based can change how we see things.
Mhm.
When you're seeing an excited family or a family who looks well, are we considering that that may be the result of teachers who are really engaged? That may be the result of a parent who got a good night's rest. That may be the result of an engaging curriculum in the classroom. Like, so many things influence a moment that sometimes I'm not sure if we really open ourselves up to consider it. And something like Bronfrenbrenner's ecological model really encourages us to do that.
Mhm.
It really encourages us to consider, you know what, I see the child, but what about the relationships around the child?
Mhm.
Or the relationships in that child's environment, or what about the child's environment itself, or what about the context of that child's birth or the birth of their parents? All of these things consider. Oh, powerful. I see the comment in the chat.
Yeah.
So, because we want to leave room for questions, when you consider why this all matters, I once heard this quote, and it was a part of the description, is that when racism fell, we were all outside. And we consider racism isms. The idea is like, we all have biases. And if for no other reason, because our brains want to work more efficiently. Like, sometimes the bias is just because our brain wants to find the shortest way between whatever it is, or it's a practice habit, without taking a position of curiosity. I'm sure consultants on the line know about the stance of wondering. But curiosity in general can help free us up from the biases that we may work from unknowingly.
Mhm.
And so we wanted to kind of highlight this because, again, in our actual work, we challenged each other. We were challenged in this space to really consider, all right, we're seeing this happen. What don't we know?
Mhm.
What more is there to consider? What more is there about this moment that may be happening that we want to be mindful of?
Mhm.
So Ms. Williams, do you have any thoughts you want to add?
I do. And so, as a school director, I'm supervising teachers who have also been through the pandemic, who have kids who have been through the pandemic. And now we are trying to find this new norm again, because we'll never have the old norm. But what I'm finding is that as a school leader, I really struggled with getting teachers to release their internal, or at least acknowledge their biases when they were challenging behaviors in the classroom, when they were challenging families, and for them to release or at least acknowledge some of that bias so that we can really get to the root of children and what's going on with them and how we can help and support. And so I'm challenging my teachers to not just look at that microsystem about the people around them, although it's the most influential. Let's also think about, they live in a neighborhood where there was a shootout. And now we have this child that's coming in and, he's tantruming for whatever reason. And instead of you getting upset because this is something that 2-year-olds do, but it's frustrating to you, let's consider all those systems and be patient and really work with children in a different way. And so this is something that I feel like is super important for all of us to know as practitioners when working with children and families. But as a leader of adults, we have to at least acknowledge that we do have biases and that we have to be aware of it, and that understanding that there's a whole scope to a child to meet their whole needs, that we can't just assume why they are behaving or why they are developing in a certain way. And so this honestly is 80% of my day. 80% of my day is talking with teachers and getting them to understand and shift that paradigm so that they can begin to really meet the needs of children. So in the work that we do, I find that most of my day, especially now, is spent doing that. But it's the part that I think is most impactful when it does happen. So I'll continue to do that work on my end, and it's just been really helpful, Mr. Harris, for your guidance and, giving me the vocabulary and giving me the insight to be able to support them.
You're being very kind. We worked together and influenced each other. But I hope that you guys heard what Ms. Williams shared, because it really is an important thing. And we want to also respect time. So here are some reflection questions to if anyone wants to share. I know people have been using the chat. We have I think we did a really good job. So kudos to everyone who shared, still got a chance to share, utilize the chat.
Yeah.
We have about 9 minutes. And we just want to ask, if you do choose to share verbally, if you could just be mindful of your share times, if we want to get as many people as possible. But we're open to questions. We're open to reflections. Again, just being mindful of the time. We have about 9 minutes left. So feel free, either raise your hand or you just want to pop off mute. First come, first serve. I do see the comment there by Dylan, and that is something we had. We only had 50 minutes, and that's actually kind of the next level to this, is considering all of the concentric circles. I'm struggling with that, concentric circle, because that's exactly true, Dylan. So now you think about the child, that child's parents, you don't even go to the school, just that child's parents has their own kind of ecosystem around them that's influencing the way they show up. And then you bring that into the school, and that child is not interacting with another child with their own ecosystem, and then the teachers, and think about all those things crossing, right? Without a curiosity, it's very easy to be like, oh, it's whatever, this is what it is.
Right.
So I know that resonated with me. You had a thought.
It did, because you're right. It is so complex. And so in this work, I do find, okay, let's go through this child's lenses. And then the teachers also, like I see that I have to go through the teacher's lenses. And so just that complexity of understanding how all these different rings interact with one another, I'm glad you called that out, because I think that's why it's 80% of my day, because I'm doing it with teachers, I'm doing it with kids, I'm doing it with moms and dads. And the hope is that we can challenge everyone in this building to understand that, so that we all can do the work. And so thank you for bringing that up. We literally were talking about that yesterday.
Anyone have any thoughts or questions? Again, we'd love to hear from you. A reflection question on the screen too.
I'm working as a consultant. This is like my first time doing this, so I'm very new to it. I just started in September. But thank you. First and foremost, I just really appreciate using the model, the Bronfrenbrenner model, because I've always felt very connected to it. Just being reintroduced to it, it's making me think of actually like sharing it with the teachers that I work with, because I just don't know if they're familiar with it. I'm wondering, I'm just curious to see how it could help, if they feel like it could be helpful, just for their own knowledge and for their perspective taking of the kids that they're working with and the families. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love that you said perspective taking, because if there's any field, I think it's needed in life, but if there's any field where perspective taking is super important, it's the field that we are in. And so thank you for sharing that. I think it's a great idea to present it to teachers or present it to other adults that you might work with, because it's always a nice reminder of how complex development and behaviors can be.
I have to apologize, because I was just reminded that this session goes until 3, so we're rushing for absolutely no reason. So I'm going to take that on the chin. And so again, opening up for people to share. We'd love to hear, and again, the reflection is there if you'd like to share that. But Ms. Williams, and one of the things I was thinking about as people think about whether they want to share or not, or use the chat, is one of the, like, we've come in a day right? And I can remember thinking to it ourselves, there's this teacher who did something that we would consider out of pocket. Colloquialism was just like, that's just out of character.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember how powerful it was for us to kind of consider, like, what aren't we seeing?
Mm-hmm.
Because the easy thing is to maybe think, any number of things that may fall into like an easy bucket of like, oh, maybe they're just tired, or that
Mm-hmm.
child is small, or they're not using their toolbox. And the cool thing about this model is it encourages to think like, what don't we know? Especially in a situation like where a teacher in this case does something so different,
Mm-hmm.
so contrary to their behavior, that the stance of curiosity can be expanded to really encourage us. All right, you know what? Let me find out their story. Because another
Right.
way we can theme this presentation is like, let me find out their story.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see what's happening. And something as trivial as like with teachers, you may find out like, hey, my son just got locked up.
Yeah.
He didn't feel comfortable to share, and that's for other reflective spaces, but I didn't feel comfortable to share.
Mm-hmm.
But that's influencing me today. So I'm holding that in my mind. And so that makes it challenging for me to want to engage with the kids, and it's happening. And it could have easily just come in and say, hey, don't yell at the kids, do whatever these things. We'll talk about it in the coaching model. But if you can slow down as a consultant, as a director, whatever position you hold,
Mm-hmm.
and really consider, what don't I know? It can really help. And someone said in the chat, there we go, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's really beneath the iceberg? Because we're only seeing a few percentage on the top. So maybe think about that.
Yeah, that made me think too, just about especially in ECE, just the power of relationships. And when we build or we foster a trusting and safe relationship, you don't have to assume or guess or use your bias as much as if you knew that person's story, if they felt comfortable sharing their story with you. I like that reframe that just went into the chat. Instead of thinking, what's wrong with you? I reframe to tell me your story. And I love that. And we do, and even with children, right? Like, I think it's a pet peeve of mine, I'm sure for some of you, when a child is having a moment and they say, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with them? Because their body is showing an emotion that maybe they can't express, or maybe it has been an experience or whatever their story is. So it does bother me when people say like, what's wrong with them or what's wrong with you. So I love that reframing. What's your story? What happened to you? Right. So I really appreciate that.
Does anyone have a thought they want to share? Again, we have plenty of time. Sorry for rushing. I see the chat is very active, but we'd love to hear from some individuals who want to share a thought or reflection. And thank you, Carla, for sharing.
I just want to say, I'm learning as I've been doing this for a number of years, that rather than looking at a child from the outside in, we need to look at the inside out. What's going on internally? Yes, the outside tells us something, but it's really what's going on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes time to ask questions, get to know the child's environment, get to know their family history, what they may have experienced, get to know how is the relationship with the teacher. It could just be a school thing. Sometimes it's the way the teacher handles things, because I know when I work with programs and I may get a referral for challenging behavior. And when I go to observe, I don't see it. I see normal behavior.
Yeah.
But what I do see is the teacher's biases. And then having to have that conversation with them to say, why do you feel that way? And I always have people to change their language, not what's wrong with you, what happened to you.
Yeah.
That is my pet peeve. There's something wrong with all of us.
Right.
But what happened to you that caused you to behave this way?
Mm-hmm.
And I put it on them. If I asked you that way, how would you feel? That would make you feel like you're different than everybody else. And that's not what we're here to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm learning to teach caregivers to look at the child from the inside out, not just go by what you see on the outside, because the outside tells you a little bit, just like the picture we saw, tells us a little bit, but it really doesn't tell us what's going on inside of that child and causing that behavior. So, and I'm not going to hold up. That's just my thought.
Miss Linda, one of the things I'd love to expand on when you talked about challenging the teacher is I think my next pivot was also considering, like you talked about today, what's happening inside the teacher.
Mhm.
What don't I know? Because that's
Mhm.
really helped me. And I'm not going to speak about anybody else's story but my own. So sometimes I get I used to get really frustrated with teachers because I'm like, we've talked about everything, we've gone through the strategies. I've tried to, make the space as safe as I can. I'm sorry, Sherry, sometimes I'm not perfect with it, but I tried my best. And it'll be like, it's not happening. And when I really challenge myself to step further out, have I considered what's happening around the teacher?
Yeah.
Have I considered their own ecology? Right.
That's
And
right.
realizing that, you know what, some of these teachers are coming from the same environment where the children are living in.
Or worse.
Or worse.
Or worse, yeah.
Right. And then have responsibility on top of that, because that's the stinky thing about adult is that we have responsibilities.
Mhm.
And so now I'm coming in to ask you to engage in a different way to shift your paradigm without really considering all of you and taking that into account, even to just ask you, hey, like, what happened to you today?
Mhm.
What's, or someone in the chat, I love this, like, what's influencing you today?
Exactly.
Right, normalizing that. So I think that's kind of the next level, because it can really help give us the grace and latitude to be like, all right, you know what, I've tried this 1,000 times, but maybe today there's something different going on.
Exactly. And I think it's your relationship. Because I may coach differently than a lot of coaches, because I want to know, what is your norm? Is this maybe the environment? Because I came from a household, we were very engaged, but we were on the quiet side. There are a lot of households that are on the loud side. And for me, that's uncomfortable, because I'm thinking, are you guys mad at each other? But that's their norm. But then I have to say to them, you have to recognize everybody. All children can't handle all that noise. And you may come from an environment that's loud, but think about what it does to someone else. In other words, being considerate for everybody that's in the room, not just because it's your norm. It's not everybody's norm, but you have to have those relationships and those conversations where they feel comfortable in sharing. And a lot of times you get more than what you are expecting, and then you can go a little bit deeper. And then that's when I refer you to a therapist that can maybe help you, because I don't want to be your therapist. So
Thank you for sharing, Miss Linda.
Yes.
And again, those who are sharing in the chat, we appreciate you guys and everyone using the multiple functions.
Yes.
Again, there's still space in the room for a few more comments before I guess we close.
Yeah.
So does anyone have any other thoughts and share? We're all learning from each other in this space.
I'm curious about some of the comments about decolonizing. If you haven't checked out the chat, there have been a couple comments about it. Is somebody brave enough to maybe vocally share and go into a little bit of depth about that? Or someone who might agree or disagree?
Can share. I'm a pretty direct consultant. I go in everything with love and support and kindness. But I'm also very like blunt. And so I ask a lot of hard questions. And I let my coaches and everything know before, like, hey, I ask these hard questions to kind of see where you are. And once I go into a classroom, sometimes I do see like, hey, this is a teacher concern, right? This is the things that you come with. These are your own biases, things like that. And so I will ask directly, right? Like I will ask directly. But what I have noticed is that my organization, we work to do this every single ECMH meeting, right? Every single time we're checking in, this is things like we're bouncing the hard questions off of each other. Would you ask a provider this? Do you think it would be more well received if it was a similar culture, right?
Did everyone else lose Keisha? Is it just... Keisha, hopefully if you're still there, you get a chance to come back. We'd love to hear you share the rest of that thought.
Hello.
We lost you for a moment.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Okay, so maybe it's just us. Someone said I can hear.
Oh, sorry. It's us. Oh, she's cutting in and out. Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm so
She
sorry.
is.
So like just the really hard questions, and sometimes they're cultural questions, right? And so like the most recent I have right now is that I have a white teacher in a Black Head Start classroom. I'm in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, right? We are Black AF. And I'm Black, right? Like everybody in Head Start is Black.
Raggedy
And right. And she keeps crying, right? And so I have to put my biases to the side of just that in general. But then I have to ask her the really hard questions of how do you think it makes your coworkers feel if you're crying this often and you are the only white woman here, right? What does that look like to them? How is that perceived to the parents, right? What is that? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, needed this today. Sorry. Right. And so those are the really hard things, but the conversation that came from it was really rich. And she stepped back and she realized, and she's like, I'm not doing this intentionally, right? Like this is anxiety, this is this, whatever. But culturally, we're just clashing. And how do we come to kind of this place? But if you don't bring it up, if you don't have that hard conversation, if you don't have the time to even do it, that's where it gets weird. But yeah, like, sorry, that's a lot of talking, but I just wanted to put that out there. I think you got to ask the really hard questions. You got to be okay with them. You got to practice them with people that you feel comfortable with so that you can dive into that decolonization. And even when you think that you've reached a level, talk to someone else and try to take yourself to another level because you haven't reached it. No one has ever.
I think one of the things that I'm hearing is thematic for a lot of individuals here is the idea of this, at least so far, our approach and our hope was to challenge everyone to consider new questions, new positions of curiosity to really expand our practice and engagement. Because we can fall into the trap of thinking that we know. I heard someone share. We can fall into the space where like, I got it. And again, that's just the practice of our brains. And the difficult questions like what don't I know or what happened to you? Some questions are internal questions, and I still not going in chat because I was really thinking about that. I don't know if I come out and say what happened to you,
Right,
if I feel safe enough. But maybe that encourages me to think it's not what's wrong with you. What happened? What don't I know? And so I really want to encourage everyone to really consider some of the things shared and consider again the idea, just the idea that there's more to it. There's a story here that led up to that moment, to that specific moment. And if we can consider that, there might be a lot to learn. It actually may change our whole way of approaching any given situation. And I go back to what Dylan said. And while our focus and emphasis is on the power of the child, we think about that the child is always influenced by all of the adults around them. And so now there are these circles that are just interacting and creating these spaces that we need to learn to exist in. These spaces where like it's really about the differences and not really just about the similarities. We need to pay attention to some of those differences. So for me, that is one of the major takeaways. And just thank you for everyone who leaned in and asked a question or made a comment or shared in their group. It was wonderful and incredibly awesome.
Yes, same. Thank you all so much. And this was really thought-provoking for me. I know Mr. Harris and I talk about it all the time, but to have you all and your interacting with you and hearing your thoughts just made it so worthwhile for me. So thank you all so much. I thought this was a very, very rich and great discussion.
Yeah, wishing you guys a good rest of the day. Hope you enjoyed the conference overall.
Thanks, friends.
Thank you, guys. I want to thank both of you for a great and just thought-provoking presentation. We really appreciated having both of you here. And to the rest of the group, we have our closing session. So we hope you've got enough energy to make it through that. And everybody have a great afternoon. Thanks.